Okay, one more thing before we move on to four-sided figures, quadrilaterals. I want to talk about trigonometry. Don't panic. The trigonometry on this test is easy. The only thing you really need to know is SOHCAHTOA. Well, what does it mean? It defines the three trigonometric function: sine, S-I-N, cosine, C-O-S, and tangent, T-A-N. Now, one word of caution, don't confuse this tangent with the one that has to do with circles, a line that touches a circle at one point. This is strictly a trigonometric function. Okay, what do these functions mean? Well, if we have a triangle and an angle which is always denoted theta, which is a Greek letter. This is a right triangle, so we know that the side opposite the right angle is called the hypotenuse. That's the H in SOHCAHTOA. The side opposite theta is called the opposite side, O. That's the O of SOHCAHTOA. The side next to theta, or adjacent to it, is called the adjacent side. That's the A of SOHCAHTOA. So here's what SOHCAHTOA means. Sine, S, equals opposite divided by hypotenuse. S equals O over H. Cosine equals equals adjacent over hypotenuse. That's the CAH of SOHCAHTOA. And the tangent is the TOA, opposite divided by adjacent. If you just write the equation for the function, you can usually solve most problems on this test. So, here are a couple of examples from a recent test. Here are a couple of questions from a recent test that involve trigonometry. The first one is question number 21, so it's starting to get into the moderately difficult range. We have a right triangle and an angle theta, and here are the sides. And the question is just, what is the tangent of angle theta? Well, you can do this without even knowing what the choices are. You know the tangent is opposite, which is 6, divided by adjacent, which is 11. So the tangent is 6 over 11. Okay, now suppose that they had given you this triangle, 5 and 12. Now we know the tangent of theta is 5 over 12. Suppose they had asked you for the cosine of theta. Well, now you'd have to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse. And I'm sure you remember that 5 and 12 go with 13. So the cosine is 12 over 13. Okay, let's do one that's a little more difficult. This is question number 38 from a test. There is a ladder against a wall. The ladder makes a 65-degree angle with the ground. The ladder is 10 feet long. How far is the base of the ladder from the wall? Now the answers are given in terms of trig functions. So you're not going to have to use your calculator to find out the sine or cosine or tangent of 65 degrees. That's going to be in the answer. So as I said before, don't go calculating things you don't have to. Okay, here are the answers. 10 sine 65, 10 cosine 65, 10 tangent 65, 10 divided by sine 65, and 10 divided by cosine 65. Okay, all problems of this type are solved very simply with the following rules. Look at the angle. Look at where the angle is that we want a function of. Look at what's given and look at what you need. See what you need and what you're given, how they relate to this angle. Well, we need this distance, and we're given this distance. And that function of 65 degrees is the cosine. So cosine 65 degrees is equal to what we don't know, the distance to the wall, divided by 10. All we have to do is solve this equation for x, and I'm sure you know how to do that. If you want to review the algebra section, if you don't know how to do it, you will know how to do it then. It's x equals 10 cosine 65. Okay, now it's time to talk about quadrilaterals. There will be a lot of them on this test. But unless the question involves the sum of the angles, which is always 360 degrees, the quadrilateral will be special in some way. The most commonly encountered quadrilaterals on this test are parallelograms, squares, and rectangles. You can think of a square as just a special rectangle, and a rectangle is just a special parallelogram. So here are the definitions. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral, a figure with four sides, with opposite sides equal and parallel. A rectangle is a parallelogram with four right angles. I'm sure you're familiar with rectangles. And a square is a rectangle where all the sides are equal. All right, let's get some confusing terminology out of the way. The bottom side of a parallelogram is referred to as the base. The perpendicular distance between the two bases is called the height, also sometimes called the altitude. Now, the bottom side of a rectangle is called the length, and the other side is called the width. For a square, it's yet a different terminology. All of the sides are called S, sides. Okay, the most commonly asked questions about quadrilaterals involve area. Don't anticipate it. It might ask for perimeter. Okay, here are the area formulas. You must know them. For a parallelogram, the area equals the base times the height. For a rectangle, the area equals the length times the width. And for a square, the area equals the side times the side, which is the side squared. Okay, let's do a problem from a real test. This was actually number 50, so it was considered a fairly hard problem. It concerns a tent. The dimensions of the tent are given as shown, and the question is, what is the total surface area of the tent? Well, the surface area involves a bottom rectangle, which is 8 feet by 10 feet. So that's 80 feet, 80 square feet. Two sides, which are 5 by 10 rectangles. So those are each 50. And then two triangles on the end with base 8 and height 3. And you know that the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So the area of each of the triangles is 12. All you have to do is add these up to get the surface area. This is not a hard question if you know your area formulas. Okay, so far we've only talked about figures with straight lines. Now we're going to talk about circles, which might seem difficult, but are really quite easy. First, the definitions. The radius, r, of a circle is the distance from the center of the circle to any point on the circumference. You remember, we talked about the perimeter of a circle being called the circumference. The diameter is the distance through the center connecting 2 points on the circumference. It's easy to see that the diameter is equal to twice the radius. Okay, now for two formulas you must know. The area of a circle is equal to pi times the radius squared. The circumference is equal to 2 pi times the radius. These formulas are easily confused because each one has a pi, a 2, and an r. One way to avoid getting confused is to remember the circumference as pi times the diameter. C equals pi d could keep you out of trouble. Okay, don't worry about this Greek letter pi. It's a number close to 3.14, and for practical purposes, 3 is usually close enough. Don't calculate it unless you have to. Okay, let's go a little further into circle relationships, because they come up quite a bit. First of all, there are 360 degrees around a circle, both at the center and along the circumference. An angle which has a vertex at the center of the circle is called a central angle. The central angle is equal in degrees to the arc that it cuts off on the circumference of the circle. An angle that has a vertex on the circle is called an inscribed angle. The arc that it cuts off is twice the inscribed angle. And so an inscribed angle is half of the central angle that cuts off the same arc. Okay, we're almost at the end of our geometry discussion. The one thing left is volume. You'll be expected to know the formula for the volume of a rectangular prism, or also called a rectangular solid. And that's just a fancy way of saying a box. The volume of a box is length times width times height. So that's just an extension of the area formula for a rectangle. You multiply the height by the length times the width, which is the area of the rectangle. Here's a cautionary word. Just as students often anticipate that a question will be about area when it is about perimeter, so it is easy to anticipate that a question about a solid will be about volume. Sometimes the question is about surface area, which is just the sum of the areas of all the faces, as we've just seen.